Right, this is just the introduction, so don't start interpreting yet. The speech is basically about mathematics, arithmetic, and the things we learn at school and that we forget afterwards. I'm going to mention a few terms. First of all, Fahrenheit and Celsius for temperature measurements. I'll also talk about latitude and longitude. I'll talk about probabilities and compound interest. I'll just use the terms. I won't really be discussing any technical aspects. These are just examples of arithmetical problems. And I might mention subprime mortgages right at the end. That's all for the introduction. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, a while ago I decided to try out a new recipe. And in a fit of modernity, I decided to look for the recipe on the internet. And on the internet, it was fairly simple, but the temperatures were in Fahrenheit rather than Celsius. Since I live in Europe, my oven works in Celsius, so I had to try and figure out how many degrees Fahrenheit, or rather how many degrees Celsius, I needed to actually program my oven. It was relatively simple. I went on Google and I got the right answer. 300 degrees Fahrenheit is about, well, 148.88 Celsius, which means that my oven needed to be at around 150, and then I was okay. And then I started feeling very guilty because you see, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I would have been able to convert Fahrenheit to Celsius in my head without even thinking about it, because that was one of the things I was taught at school back then. It was part of the mathematics or arithmetics class. We had basic problems like kilometers to miles, pounds to kilos, and Fahrenheit to Celsius or Celsius to Fahrenheit. And this was something you were expected to know. And ideally, you were expected to be able to do it in your head, because in those days, well, as you can probably tell, it was a very, very long time ago when I was at school. And it was an ancient time before we even had pocket calculators, let alone smartphones or computers. So a small child was expected to be actually able to make these calculations in their head without writing anything down. And you had to know these things because we had exams, even as small children. And if you wanted to go from one year to the next, you had to pass your exam. And if you wanted to have a good grade, you had to be able to solve these sort of problems quickly. And as an extra encouragement, if you were very, very bad in class, you could actually be hit with a stick, because I went to that kind of school back in those days. Now, of course, none of these things would happen nowadays. There's no way that a child would be expected to carry out these sort of mathematical or arithmetic calculations. But as I said, I used to be able to do this almost without thinking. And I wasn't very good at mathematics. I wasn't very good at anything when I was a child, and I'm still not very good now. But those basic kind of things I used to be able to do. And in fact, I felt so bad about this that I tried to remember the formula for conversion from Fahrenheit to centigrade or Celsius. And after a lot of effort, I was able to bring back the memories through the fog of too many years and too many beers. I actually remembered what I thought was the formula. I tried it, and I found that I got almost exactly the same result as Google, which means that somewhere in my brain, despite having played rugby for 30 years and being beaten on the head several times, I actually still have a few brain cells that are functional. But it made me think about all the other things that I have forgotten. For instance, I do remember what compound interest is, obviously, but I can't calculate it anymore. I would have to go on Google. I do remember that there's a relationship between distance and latitude and longitude, and there's another relationship between time and distance and latitude and longitude, but I don't remember the equations anymore. And again, this is something I used to know when I was a small child. And I think that's a pity in a way, because while latitude and longitude may not be immensely useful, knowing the difference between centigrade and Celsius and Fahrenheit, being able to calculate it is quite useful if you can do it without having to get your computer or your smartphone out. And knowing what compound interest is very useful. If you think about the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, people got into debt because of subprime mortgages, because they borrowed money without understanding how much they would have to pay to repay their debt, without understanding whether the mortgages were affordable or not on their salary, because they didn't understand what interest rates were, let alone what compound interest was. These are basic things that need to be taught at school. The trouble is, even if you taught these things at school, as I've just said, you tend to forget it. So I suppose teaching them at school again would be a start, but exactly what you do with people's memories, I honestly don't know. Thank you.